Welcome everyone to our webinar, Intelligence Community Whistleblowers, Risks and Consequences on the Front Lines of the War on Truth Tellers. I'm Chris Oppie, a historian at the University of Massachusetts and the director of the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy. Tonight's event is part of our year-long series on public interest whistleblowing. To learn more about our work and to see a full list of past and upcoming events, please go to our website, eipad.org. Our work is inspired by perhaps the most famous whistleblower in US history, Daniel Ellsberg, a former government official who in 1971 gave to the New York Times and 18 other newspapers a 7,000-page classified history of the Vietnam War that exposed more than 2 decades of government lies about the causes and conduct of that war. Those top secret documents were soon dubbed the Pentagon Papers. For that act of moral courage, Ellsberg was indicted on a dozen felony charges, some of them based on the deeply flawed Espionage Act of 1917, and he faced a possible sentence of 115 years in prison. Ellsberg was the first person criminally charged and tried under the Espionage Act for giving classified documents not to a foreign agent or foreign country, but to the American press and people. In this century, there have been many more such prosecutions, and we'll meet 2 guests tonight who were similarly charged under the Espionage Act. The trial of Ellsberg and his co-defendant, Tony Russo, did not go to the jury because late in the trial, the judge had little choice but to dismiss the case against them when evidence surfaced from the Watergate investigations that the Nixon White House committed crimes against Ellsberg in an effort to taint his reputation and to keep him from revealing any secrets he may have about Nixon. Since then, Ellsberg devoted the rest of his life to nonviolent activism on behalf of peace, truth-telling, nuclear disarmament, and First Amendment rights. He died last June at the age of 91. Dan was also a great supporter of other whistleblowers and often pointed out that truth-tellers do not act in a vacuum. They are greatly impacted by their times and are often inspired by other activists and truth tellers, as he was. He often said, "Courage is contagious." So let me now briefly introduce tonight's panelists. The discussion will be moderated by Kathleen McClellan, Deputy Director for the Whistleblower and Source Protection Program. WHISPER is the acronym, and that's based at Expose Facts. She is an attorney who has provided pro bono representation to a great many national security and intelligence community whistleblowers and media sources with a focus on human rights, mass surveillance, excessive secrecy, torture, and drone warfare. She has represented whistleblowers from the National Security Agency, the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security. She previously worked for the Government Accountability Project and the American Civil Liberties Union. Jeffrey Sterling was, for almost a decade, a clandestine officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, where he served on the Iran Task Force. He filed an employment discrimination suit against the CIA that led to his being fired, and his case was dismissed on the grounds that it would expose evidence that was a threat to national security. He was then charged and convicted of violating the Espionage Act for giving classified information about a CIA operation in Iran to people unauthorized to receive it. Although the prosecution produced no authoritative evidence, and Sterling continues to insist on his innocence to those charges, he had to serve 2.5 years in prison. In 2019, he published a compelling memoir called Unwanted Spy: The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. Thomas Drake is a former senior executive at the National Security Agency. He went through approved channels as a whistleblower to report on major pre-9/11 intelligence failures and multiple post-9/11 examples of wrongdoing, multi-billion-dollar fraud, waste, and abuse, as well as secret mass surveillance of the American public in violation of the Fourth Amendment. For that, he was indicted under the Espionage Act and threatened with a life prison sentence. He agreed to a plea deal that allowed him to avoid prison, but he lost his career, his pension, and much more. prior to working for the NSA, he worked in information technology for a .com, and before that, he served in the Air Force and in the Navy as an intelligence officer. For those of you listening, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them probably in the last half hour. So with that, I'm happy to turn the discussion over to our moderator, Kathleen McClellan.
Good evening. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Ellsberg Initiative for having this important discussion. I'm really delighted to be here to moderate a talk between Tom Drake and Jeffrey Sterling, two whistleblowers who the government tried very hard to silence unsuccessfully. And they have paid a severe individual price for telling the truth at a time when the war on whistleblowing and journalism, as we know it today, was really just beginning to emerge. And so I think that their stories will be very instructive to future whistleblowers, and also to see how this war on whistleblowing and journalism that we're dealing with today really came about. So with that, I know you're eager to hear from them and not me. So I would like to start it off by taking you back to the beginning, Tom and Jeffrey. And could you speak a little bit about your job and career within the intelligence community? And why don't we go in alphabetical order by first name? So Jeffrey, you can go first, this one.
Okay. Yeah, when I was with the CIA, specializing targeting Iran. I was involved. I also had background in nuclear weapons or anti-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and I was involved in an operation to thwart the Iranian nuclear program. We had plans, schematics for parts of a nuclear weapon, but they were flawed by the national labs, and no one should have been able to detect them. So the thought was, we get these plans to the Iranians. They use them, they don't work, and they can't figure it out. Well, as the operation was going along, and as I was helping it launch, I came to the realization that all of the safeguards that I was given were all false. And essentially, the operation wasn't going to thwart the Iranian nuclear program, it was going to speed it up, if not enhance it. I blew the whistle about that to my superiors, IG within the agency, and both the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Absolutely nothing came of it, of me going through those proper channels. Then I was targeted for discrimination at the agency. I was asking why I was not receiving the same opportunities as everyone else. I was told I kind of stuck out as a big black guy speaking Farsi. When I complained about Operation Merlin, that was the Iranian operation, I was suddenly given 10 times the required job requirements that anyone else would have been burdened with. Impossible for me to ever live up to that, especially considering I wasn't receiving the same support as other officers. And yes, I'm talking about the other officers were white. So I was then fired from the agency. I did file a discrimination suit, and it was dismissed, not on the merits of the case, but it was dismissed because the government argued for and the courts agreed that me going forward, a black man fighting for his civil rights in this country, is a threat to national security. Yet, though the government was able to use national security to stop me for standing up for my rights, it used national security to charge me for violating the Espionage Act on absolutely no evidence. I did not reveal information to anyone other than those who I was allowed to. Yet I was targeted. In the intelligence community, you don't have many friends when you step out of line. And I was put on trial, no evidence, and I was convicted. I spent 2.5 years in prison, and been a hell of an experience, if you will. And it's one that took years and years. But I always wonder, and I ask myself, would I have done anything differently? Absolutely not. Doing the right thing, standing up for what is right, can never be the wrong choice.
Wow. That's a phenomenal story. And I think, it's interesting that you mentioned what your job was and that you were actually protecting national security and trying to do that by blowing the whistle. I think, Tom, you had a similar motivation when you blew the whistle. If you want to talk a little bit about your job and career and the wrongdoing you witnessed. You're muted. Hold on. Unmute. Unmute, Tom, before you talk.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I did spend 9 years in the Air Force starting in '79, and this is during the Cold War, and I was a cryptolinguist flying an RC-135. So I became very familiar with protecting the Fourth Amendment. We were not allowed to, quote unquote, spy or surveil on Americans, or U.S. persons is the specific designator. And if we did, there were severe consequences. So there was a whole lot of things that were put into place over the many years. And we had annual training to make sure that we were refreshed on our obligation to protect the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. After the end of the Cold War, I was an intel officer in the Navy, all source intelligence in the National Military Joint Intelligence Center at the Pentagon. And during that period, I also became a contractor and became, very familiar with the military-industrial complex, both large-scale contractors like with Booz Allen Hamilton, for example, also boutique IT firms that were starting to emerge during the go-go 90s, early aughts. Spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley and other, high-tech research centers, especially with companies that were developing the next killer app. I was still working at NSA on a special project where our job was to bring in outside expertise and methods and techniques. And although NSA at large, not invented here syndrome, didn't really want to hear about anything from the outside, it was important based on certain congressional concerns that NSA was not meeting its obligations in terms of the 21st century. So fate would have it, in February of 2001, I decided to apply for a senior executive position at the NSA. And in late August, I joined NSA, but my first actual day on the job after in processing, getting my badge, taking the oath for the 5th time, I ended up, my first day on the job was 9/11. And all I can say is the next 4 months were a blur. I was in a very senior position. I reported to the number 3. I had a small team, but it became very apparent within just days of 9/11 that something was amiss, meaning that decisions are being made at the highest levels of the government, up to and including the president, all vetted by the vice president, that we don't need that Fourth Amendment. And the threat apparently was so real, and Americans were in such danger that in secret, you know what? We're just going to bypass the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I mention that because I was a very young teenager when the Pentagon Papers in Ellsberg became so public. And I watched all the hearings, Bella Abzug, Church Committee, Pike Committee, and a bunch of others, Rockefeller Commission, realizing that the government had gone way astray in spying on Americans when it was in violation of their rights as Americans. And of course, 2 standing committees, intel committees, were formed, and FISA came about, which was a compromise in itself, but it still provided Fourth Amendment protection. You couldn't just willy-nilly spy on Americans. There was a thing called hot pursuit. All of that disappeared after 9/11. In fact, the government at the highest levels kept it secret from the FISA court for quite some time until an article came out in 2005 with the New York Times, James Rice and Eric Littblau, revealing for the first time publicly the existence of the so-called warrantless wiretapping program. I had actually been in communication even before that, well before that, with certain staffers with the intel committees, both Senate as well as House, all approved, by the way, and all in accordance with the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, as if that was going to make a difference and help protect me. Well, I went ahead under that act. But after 2005, I decided to cross the Rubicon. There was a decision I had to make because I knew there was far more to the warrantless wiretapping program than even was revealed in the New York Times. The kicker was that very few people even knew about the secret warrantless wiretapping program. And I was one of the few people that knew about it. It was super compartmented. It was about as secret as it can be as a program. It was referred to as the program in the government. And I was tagged and flagged by the government internal to NSA as a suspect. Now, it is true, I ended up going to the press and a reporter at the time of the Baltimore Sun regarding what was going on at NSA. Everything I provided the reporter was unclassified. There was never any classified information that I ever provided the reporter. Didn't matter. The government ended up opening up a major investigation. Turns out there was 5 full-time prosecutors, 25 FBI agents, including the mole hunter unit, and millions of dollars. And I ended up being, even now when I think about it, it's just surreal. Followed electronic surveillance, physical surveillance, leaving at work, coming back home, anywhere I went, didn't matter. And so, long story short, and what was I blowing the whistle on? Well, originally it was fraud, waste, and abuse and the 9/11 intelligence failures on top of the secret warrantless wiretapping program, which was the secret that no one was supposed to talk about. Well, in April of 2010, guess what? I end up being charged on the Espionage Act, 5 counts, 4 for lying to the FBI. I was actually telling the truth, but they turned the truths into lies. And 1 for, ironically enough, obstruction of justice. So that began, this was after they raided me, 2.5 years earlier. So for the next 14 months, I had to do everything I could to keep myself out of prison because I was facing many decades in prison, effectively a life sentence.
Yes.
And that's fortunately, with the help of both defense attorneys on the criminal side, as well as a number of other attorneys, including Kathleen and her colleague, I was able to prevail and I went free. But I certainly had paid an extraordinarily high price for simply standing up for what was right. And in essence, it became a crime to report government crimes, especially in the national security space.
The way you phrase that, it's a crime to report government crimes. I wanted to hone in on something you both mentioned, which is the use of internal channels. Oftentimes, whistleblowers or media sources are criticized for not using internal channels. Can you talk a little bit about your experience using those internal channels? Jeffrey, you mentioned the Inspector General. Tom, I know you also went to the Inspector General, the Congressional Oversight Committees. These are the internal channels that are available for intelligence community whistleblowers. And in your experience, did they work?
If I can go first. Joining the agency, and I'm sure it's the same in any intel, anywhere within the intel community, that you're given assurances that there are avenues for you to take concerns, places for you to bring up things that may be wrongdoing at your various agencies. However, these mechanisms are set up really to identify the whistleblower or the rabble rouser to their agency. In my instance, I was blowing the whistle on a faulty Iranian operation and discrimination at the CIA. I went to both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. I was able to meet with staffers there, but every one of those staffers was either had a current connection to former employee relationship with the CIA. I mean, and the first thing they did after meeting with me was notify the agency about what I was doing. I mean, at no point did the CIA not know that Jeffrey Sterling was out there talking about bad things at the CIA. And so the assurances about being protected and confidentiality for bringing forward complaints in the intelligence community, they're all false. The mechanisms that we're assured about are really there to identify you and to set you up for retaliation. And I just thought, and that's why they put, they want individuals from the intelligence community on these staffs so that they do have that direct line right back to, I mean, not to the members of those communities, the senators or the representatives, but the first call they do, and in my instance, was calling the CIA.
Tom, I
It's
think.
pretty clear.
No, please. Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, it's pretty clear in my case that any of the disclosure channels, I went through many, including my immediate channel chain, which is the number 3. I also went to the IG as well, and I also went to the committees. And all I can say is that all of those, especially the formal channels, especially under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, all of them were exposure channels. It's quite clear early on that I was tipped off. Well, let's say they tipped off NSA regarding the fact that I had gone in confidence. And at that time, I didn't have to notify NSA that I was going to the oversight committees. And I experienced severe retaliation, reprisal early on. In fact, I lost my team and had to move to a different part of the agency after less than a year there. I think they were hoping that I would just leave and go back to whatever, quote unquote, I was doing. The cultural antibodies, I will say, kicked in really hard to expel the foreign object named me, because I was asking the wrong questions or raising questions that made people very, very uncomfortable. I remember confronting I also went to the Office of General Counsel. This was early October. And he said, "You just don't understand, Mr. Drake, we just need the data." And I realized at that point that the guardrails of the Fourth Amendment no longer existed. And there was no attempt at all to protect the Fourth Amendment, that the quote unquote, the exceptional, or as they called it, exigent conditions, a weird phrase, exigent conditions apply. That was actually what I was told. And so we were authorized at the highest level, signed by the president, and basically a secret memo order granting NSA to serve as the executive agent for the program. They later claimed that it was only for, foreign intelligence, and there was always an external link. What they hid was the fact that they're gaining phenomenal access based on either existing agreements or new agreements with certain telecommunication concerns, and just staggering amounts of data, because they were afraid, and this is one of the grand paradoxes of 9/11, because they had failed to protect people, did not keep people out of harm's way on that fateful day, that they now decided, you know what, we just need all the data, because, hey, that's the way we're going to solve the problem the next time, or prevent it the next time. And so they chose to just willfully violate the Fourth Amendment. In fact, I was told at one point very early on that the Constitution was a quaint document, just a piece of paper.
Wow. I want to shift gears just a little bit. You both faced charges under the Espionage Act, which is a World War I era law purportedly intended to go after spies, but it's been used, as we heard in the introduction, to silence dissent, including against Daniel Ellsberg. One of the primary criticisms of the Espionage Act is that it does not allow for a public interest defense, meaning you cannot explain your actions or defend your actions by pointing out that you are disclosing information in the public interest. And so I want to ask you, as individuals who faced these very serious charges, did you feel like you were able to present a full defense within the confines of the Espionage Act, and why or why not?
Let you go first.
You want me? Okay, absolutely not. I mean, replaying those myriad of secret hearings that were all classified because of the nature of the case. The Espionage Act, just this draconian World War I era law. It's a strict liability law. If you're charged with it, it is assumed you're automatically guilty. And the problem with it is there is no public interest defense of any kind, none whatsoever. Ellsberg faced 115 years, and the only reason I think he went free is because the government decided to go too far and, quote unquote, broke into a psychiatrist's office to rifle through his personnel file. Talk about violation of privacy. The Espionage Act is, and this is ironic, of course, it wasn't until the Obama administration that they started using it to go after whistleblowers in the national security space, or threaten national security whistleblowers. It became the go-to law because they knew that even if you were able to prevail, let's say if it went as far, if it even got that far. And they were always trying, I remember, I was like the first case in which they wanted to pin somebody with the Espionage Act because that would set the precedent for all of the rest of the cases, including Jeffries and a number of John Kiriakou. There was a number of cases during that period over just a few short years. There is no defense. You can plead during sentencing, in terms of up or down, but how the judge is also a bit hamstrung when it comes to the sentencing guidelines for the Espionage Act because it's such an egregious law. The kicker is it was never designed to go after people like us. But it's clear when you actually look at the original wording, you could easily see why the government would want to use it against those who dared to dissent, those who dared to take issue with government policy, those who would, quote unquote, become activists, and those who would simply not remain silent and decide to stand up for once. And so all I know, there's still an asterisk next to my name because I'll still have people that say, charged with espionage. Well, I didn't actually commit espionage. Jeffrey didn't commit espionage. There's the last thing we were doing. We were actually standing up for the highest and the best of America, not just the aspirational nature of America for all its faults and contradictions, but what's best for America. And of course, that didn't matter because you're rogue, you're a troublemaker, you're out of line, and we're going to punish you.
And none of that you were able to present in court.
Oh,
Tom.
None of it. Couldn't present any of it. In fact, the judge, in my case, to his credit, the government wanted to eliminate any reference to the First Amendment. That's interesting. Take the First Amendment off the table.
Or the word whistleblowing.
Or the word whistleblowing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
The judge did not go for that, but it didn't help the defenses you were able to present. Jeffrey, do you want to answer? Yeah. Do you feel like you were able to present a full defense?
Absolutely not. I mean, being a strict liability law, I mean, it is impossible to defend yourself against being charged with the Espionage Act. I mean, it's not a law per se. It's a we say so law by the government. Yeah. All they have to do is say this individual violated the Espionage Act. Throwing in using the Espionage Act, they're able to hide any evidence. They don't have to turn over any evidence to the accused. As you said, no public interest defense. Even in my instance, they tried to hide evidence that was being used against me, didn't want me to have access. In one of the few moments of clarity with my judge, she denied that. She's like, wait a minute, he already had access to this material. He should have access to it now. But being charged, just being charged, I was trying to serve my country and then being labeled a spy by my country because I stood up against my country doing wrong, doing illegalities in my name as a U.S. citizen, as someone, and also as someone serving. So that was quite a blow, being charged with espionage. And then, like, well, okay, what are the elements that you're using to charge me against? They didn't really have to do anything. All they have to do is charge you with espionage. charge you under the Espionage Act. And, that is the home run shot for the government. I mean, why so many people plead to this. I mean, I was facing about 100 years for the 10 charges that I was facing about 100 years. And, certainly, I was never going to plead to something I didn't do. And so, I mean, to me, that, justice and truth will prevail. And I certainly believe that during the trial, and I still do to a large extent, but I did spend time in prison. And that's the power of the Espionage Act. You don't really have to have proof. I mean, there was absolutely no when, where, how presented by the government in my case. As a matter of fact, the government established that other individuals had access to information that I didn't have access to that was supposedly revealed to the reporter or the writer of the book. But none of that mattered. I mean, it's all about image. It was bad enough being in the defendant's in the defendant's chair, but then also you're being labeled a spy, and there really is no proof necessary. And unfortunately, our judiciary, our judges are willing to go along with that. It's all in this fear of national security. I mean, the judiciary doesn't want to encroach upon, make decisions with regard to how something is classified or how national defense is being used against defendants. Well, not doing so, allows the abuse of the system. And the best example of abusing the system with regard to innocent before guilty, anything like that, is the Espionage Act. And the government is using it not to go after spies. Absolutely not.
No.
They're using it to quiet dissent. And I think the Obama administration set a precedent of using it indiscriminately against anyone who dared walk outside the line, stand up to government wrongdoing. So it's, I'm a lawyer, so it's hard to even view the Espionage Act as a valid law. I mean, Martin Luther King said, we have a duty to disobey an unjust law. If there is an unjust law in this country, it is the Espionage Act.
Part of it is Jeffrey's stating what he's just shared with you all. We dared to question the authorities, and questioning the authorities just brings amble down on top of you. The irony in my own case is they were looking for evidence, and part of the evidence is they were able to obtain by raiding my house over a period of 9 hours, taking just about anything that had a piece of paper on it, including books, including electronic media, my original iPhone, and a bunch of other stuff. But I had a few boxes that were approved for removal from NSA when I went to teach the National Defense University. That became the basis, quote unquote, for the charges in terms of the documents used. But all that was approved. I actually went through the process of having what was unclassified reviewed, boxed up, labeled, and even when I was leaving, the final check, a security guard had the authority, which he did, to open up a box and just sample what was being taken out. They claimed that I was, quote unquote, stealing government property since 2002, if not earlier, that I was in some kind of conspiracy to bring all this out. How ironic.
One of the more Kafkaesque moments in your case, Tom, I think, was when one of the documents was retroactively classified. So it was classified. And then the government retroactively classified it and said that Tom should have known that it was marked wrong when it said unclassified. And I think the former classification czar, Bill Leonard, who served as an expert in Tom's case, called it the most egregious intentional overclassification that he had ever seen.
No,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Tom. It's your
the government actually said that I should have known not only it was classified, it was born classified by virtue of it, quote unquote, I guess because it was begetted inside NSA in its original form. that made it classified. And then when that became a facetious argument in front of the judge, they then argued, well, it deserves the same protection as if it were classified.
Right.
Under some obscure administrative public law / regulation.
And in a democracy, the idea that government information could be born secret is it's antithetical to a democracy. And so when you have the classification system and there's information that should be properly classified, but when you have that abused and then misused to try to target someone who's dissenting, that undermines the entire classification system, which we do need to protect national security when used properly. So that's, I think it's ironic that in the name of protecting national security by prosecuting you, I believe that the government was truly undermining its entire classification system. Jeffrey, I did want to ask. Sorry.
Okay. No one that I know of has ever been prosecuted, even administratively, just say administratively, for quote unquote overclassifying a document. No one.
And the executive order, like governing the classification system, punishes overclassification and disclosure equally, but only one of those gets you in trouble, apparently.
Yeah.
And actually, let's be realistic. The greatest leaker of classified information is the US government. It's only the information that the government does not want public that gets punished. And actually, brings me to my next question, which is, in both of your cases, there were journalists involved. And in Jeffrey and yours in particular, the journalists became particularly embroiled. And so I just wanted to get each of your perspectives on, did you feel that those journalists supported you? Did any journalists support you? How was your experience working with the media or having worked with the media and then being targeted under this, under the Espionage Act?
Yeah, I think, well, in my instance, the aspect of, I didn't have, that relationship to a journalist. I didn't divulge the classified information. I had a relationship with a journalist, an individual who wrote the story about my discrimination actions against the agency. And it was disclosed that during my trial that absolutely no classified information was given up during that interview. Yet, but they made the tie-in. It was just completely circumstantial. Criminal law is supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, these are just circumstances. But what was another shock for me was how the mainstream media mainly really had no real concern about my case at all, except when a member of their own was being threatened with being called to reveal their source. It was amazing, during the lead up to my trial, there was so much in the press about will the reporter be called, and if he called, will he go to jail for not revealing his sources? It became, the reporter or writer in this instance was Jim Risen. It became the Risen case. I became a spectator to my own trial. And then the moment that the danger was over for Risen, or any other reporter, they had absolutely no interest in my case. Even though there's so many ramifications, as we see with Assange, that they can use the Espionage Act to go after reporters to do anywhere in the world. Yet, that danger was just ignored by them in mind. It's like once one of their own was protected, they moved on. And I think that just emboldens the government to continue what they're doing. Abusing the use of the Espionage Act, targeting individuals in the intelligence community who dare come forward. And I think there could be, again, it wasn't my instance, but there could be a better, maybe more respectful relationship with the press for those who do decide to go forward. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And the first thing is, drop this self-interest thing. I mean, the interest is the entire nation, not just the cabal of media. It's the interest of everyone. So treat individuals fairly, treat individuals with respect, and offer them the protections that they need in these instances.
Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, I had direct contact with the reporter secretly for a year and then face to face over several meetings for the following year. I knew that having contact with the reporter, as much as I was using encryption and everything else, eventually I knew it would catch up to me. I knew that. I was eyes wide open. There's nothing hidden here in that regard. It was just a matter of time. I also knew that I was not violating any particular law except NSA's administrative policy for having unauthorized access or unauthorized contact, in this case with a reporter. That does not mean you could lose your job, but it doesn't mean you're going to be in charge with the Espionage Act. But I knew that that was a possibility. I was all too familiar with the Daniel Ellsberg case, that the government would probably seek the Espionage Act as the primary charge to go after me. That I knew. I already knew that. But I knew I couldn't remain silent. But what's interesting about the reporter, the reporter, she's given me permission to say anything I want about the relationship, right? And it goes back quite a ways now. She won't talk about it, but I can. And the bottom line is that she had to lawyer up big time, because the government actually said that she was a material witness of my crime. In fact, they even went further. They said she is the only eyewitness to the crime of violating the Espionage Act. The irony, of course, is they went through every electronic media I had, including my primary personal computer, and in Slack memory, unallocated memory, they actually captured a snippet of the kind of the rules that laid down with the reporter, that I would never share any classified with her at all. And even if she asked, I wouldn't provide it. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? Again, material witness, eyewitness to a crime. They threatened to bring, as a hostile witness, they threatened to bring, this just shows you what they were already looking to do, like they did in Jeffrey Sterling's case, to go directly after the quote unquote, the alleged reporter in question. They actually threatened to bring the reporter I had contact with, bring them into the courtroom as a hostile witness. That was actually on the table as a possibility.
You know, it reminds me too, Jeffrey, when you mentioned circumstantial evidence, I think it might be helpful to clarify what that is. And my understanding from reading the pleadings in your case is that it was essentially the metadata. This reporter existed. Jeffrey knew this reporter. They had contact. So therefore, you must have disclosed this information. And so that's, you know, very indicative of how deeply the journalists were linked into your case. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And the other interesting thing about reporters, you know, as Tom had mentioned, you know, in my case, you know, the government had the right to call the reporter. They were going to call the reporter. At the beginning of my trial, they were really whining to the judge, oh, we have to be able to ask this reporter anything we want. We want them to tell us their source. The judge initially said no. And then they went through an appeal. They finally, you know, the Fourth Circuit came down and said, you know, there is no source journalism protections. So the government then had the right and the power to call the journalists. You know, again, I'm a lawyer. You know, you're supposed to put on your best evidence. Well, they were whining for years, saying that they didn't have a case against me unless they were able to call the reporter. Then they were able to, and they didn't. And that's, again, the power of the Espionage Act, that they were able to do whatever they want to get the same result. I mean, not even present any evidence, and that sort of thing. So, and again, you know, the press should have been looking more at that instead of how, oh, we got by again, sort of thing. You know, look at the overall impact of what's going on and that sort of thing.
Well, that's a perfectly. Sorry, go ahead. Go, Tom.
Well, speaking of the press, because you were asking sort of like press, why didn't other press get involved? Well, where was the rest of the press? Where was the mainstream media? Where was even alternative? I mean, there was, I would call some of the constitutional rights groups and others, no one, I'm saying no one came. There was no one that filed any amicus briefings. The only one that did was you and your colleague, Kathleen, which the judge actually found to be very useful in terms of the context for why I was even being charged and sort of the rest of the story. because when you're charged with espionage, you're behind like all kinds of 8 balls. I mean, how do you get out from under those or out from behind them? I knew at some point, somewhere, I would have to influence the court of public opinion. I knew that was probably my only real chance of bringing to bear the court of public opinion on what was going inside the courtroom all those many months. So clandestine meetings, right, were planned, and meetings that actually took place with certain journal on background, because anything I said could be used against me. So I was never quoted directly in articles that began to come out. And even reporters that figured out where I was working at the time as one of the Apple stores in Bethesda, even then the rule was you can't say that you actually met me, right? I knew that was probably going to happen because people were trying to figure out, where does this guy work? Where does he live? Where I lived was easier to figure out than where I worked. So eventually, long story, there was another meeting with Jane Mayer from the New Yorker. And it was that meeting that led to her multi-month investigation regarding my case. And just still to this day, it's probably the best long form article about who I am, what happened to me, and why was it so critical to the First Amendment, and why it was such an egregious act of the government to come after me. And that was published in the New Yorker in the spring while I was facing all those years in prison. And then things started happening, because even before that, I got the Ridenour Truth-Telling Prize. And then I was contacted by Scott Pelley and the producers, and it was like the last season for that year, the last episode of top of the hour, second hour. More people saw that episode, 14 minutes, about, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on? Then the Washington Post, as I was approaching sort of the 0 hour, wrote 2 blockbuster, really powerhouse op-eds saying, gee, government, do you remember the Pentagon Papers? Maybe he really is a whistleblower, and maybe he's the wrong person. And why are you going after him anyways? Hey, we're the press over here. Remember us? So,
Yeah,
but I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know until literally the last day, as we were doing all the strikes for the jury pool. We didn't know that was on a Thursday. We were going to meet on Friday. Monday would actually begin the selection. Thursday afternoon, I thought, we're preparing for trial. And then there was an opening. I think the government was under incredible pressure, and I saw an off-ramp, and I said, you drop all the charges, I'll plead out with no time in jail, right? No fine, to what I actually did, which was, did I exceed authorized use of a government computer under the Computer Fraud Abuse Act? Yes, I did.
Well, I think the judge commented in your sentencing, Tom, that he rarely had a defendant more innocent than he was, with a less of a criminal record than he did. But I think, what's interesting about your case is that was, a tremendous victory. And I'm holding up quotes because you still lost so much professionally and personally, but you did not end up serving the prison time that Jeffrey ended up. And unfortunately, what we've seen with these Espionage Act cases is, instead of having more results like yours, Tom, we've seen more and more prison sentences and more extensions of the Espionage Act since your cases. And my colleague, Jesslyn Radak, director at Whistleblower, often said that the war on whistleblowers is really a backdoor war on the as we've seen that develop. Do you think that that's true in the decade plus since your case, Tom and Jeffrey, that going after you was really a way to go after public information and the free press? And do you feel that things have gotten better or worse?
I think things continue to get worse. I mean, I think we have the example of that. And these prosecutions are not, for the justice of going after a spy against our national defense. It's really only been used to silence dissent, and it's just, I think the trend is getting worse. I mean, we see the extension of it with Julian Assange, that they're willing to go beyond our borders for, against non-U.S. citizens. Because under the Espionage Act, it's not only that you convey inappropriately classified information, but also that you receive it or you have it. So that opens any reporter up who's willing to do a story about something going on in the intelligence community. That opens them up to being prosecuted by the Espionage Act. And I think in my case that it showed, especially in the in actually going to trial, just how easy it is for the government to get a prosecution using the Espionage Act. I mean, it wasn't Tom's case; he was in Baltimore, but I was in the Fourth Circuit in Alexandria, Virginia. The back door of the CIA, and the jury pool. It was amazing. Almost to a person in the pool had some sort of relationship or connection with the intelligence community. So, and these individuals in the back of their mind, and it's subtly sort of hinted at by the prosecution, they're like, oh, if this were to happen in your agency or any blah, blah, blah agency within the intelligence community, it's a bad thing. And individuals don't want to then come, if it gets out that they voted to acquit Jeffrey Sterling, oh, you're a traitor to your country, sort of thing. You're in the intelligence community. So I think the Espionage Act is just, it's a tool. It's a way to send a message. They were using it as a message against Tom. They were certainly using it as a message against me. Kiriakou, Manny, and what they wanted to do as they're trying to continue to do with Assange. So, and I think the trend is that it's getting worse because we don't have the oversight. We don't have, a judicial check on the abuse of this law. Individuals in Congress. When's the last time you heard anyone say they're going to reform the CIA? I mean, even efforts to reform the Espionage Act actually turn into just veiled attempts to make sure Congress people have their protections, and that sort of thing. The whistleblower is left to the wiles of being charged under the Espionage Act. So until we get the proper oversight of the use of this quote law, it is going to continue to get worse. Obama laid the groundwork. We'll use the Espionage Act to silence dissent. And that's exactly how it's being used.
In essence, what has really happened over the course of the last 15 years, on my original case, the investigation, right, began under the Bush administration, but they did not bring an actual indictment. That took Obama to bring an indictment in my case. But we've become sacrificial lambs, given up on the altar of national security. That's really what's happened. So we're expendable. What are we worth? I was senior executive. I was senior enough. They said, oh yeah, because I wasn't connected. I didn't have some sugar daddy or sugar mama. I wasn't independently wealthy. I wasn't tied to some business scion, corporate, or anything of that nature. Did not come from a political family. We're talking basic middle class America. Father was a World War II veteran, right? So we're expendable. But ever since they reignited the Espionage Act to go after sources for journalists, you keep forgetting many journalists could not do their jobs. In fact, I would argue journalism would not exist without sources. There are some journalists that do literally their own investigation, but even when they're doing their own investigation, they're interviewing people. I would say it's impossible to do journalism without having sources. So the fact that there are authorized leaks, well, then those journalists sort of get the protection by virtue of having authorized leaks given to them when the government finds it necessary or convenient to do so. But if it's unauthorized, threats, investigations, your livelihood, we're going to burn you, and you just lose it all. I have no retirement. I do have a very small annuity from the few years that I served in the government, but it's nothing compared to what I would have received had I worked another 4.5 to 5 years. But was the sacrifice worth it? Yes, it was, but the prices is extremely high. it just ends up, we become totally unprotected. But having said that, and given what Jeffrey was saying, and then you mentioned Julian Assange, now the government is like, well, you know, in essence, the Espionage Act doesn't prevent us from going after journalists. It was only what prosecutor discretion that kept them from doing so. Well, I think that's why they, under the Trump administration, Obama, interestingly enough, chose not to. The national security folks wanted to, but it opens up a huge can of worms. Just like my own judge, he actually said, we will not bring the reporter in question into the courtroom. We're not going to go down that dark path. He knew that would open up a major First Amendment issue if he allowed the reporter to come into the courtroom as a hostile witness. Now I'm hearing, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I just, in my news feed, something about Biden is considering, based on pressure from the Australian Prime Minister, apparently recently, considering dropping the case against Assange. That's probably the best thing he could do right now. He's already served enough time.
I mean, it's certainly the best thing from a free press perspective that could happen. You talked a lot of, I want to go back a little bit. You talked a little bit about sources and how the media needs sources and the authorized leaks, the government using leaks to present its case for certain national security programs. And then if anybody provides another case or other facts that contradict the government's case, then in the public opinion, then that person is targeted. Do you happen to know, Tom or Jeffrey, what effect did your arrest and prosecution have inside your former agency? The case was used to send a message. Did you ever hear about what that message was to your agency, to the CIA, to the NSA?
In my instance,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in my instance, no. Prior to being fired, I was essentially persona non grata at the agency, prevented from entering agency buildings or even having any contact with agency employees. It was interesting for my discrimination suit. I had rallied a number of other African-American employees at the agency who were really interested in standing up and finally saying no to the the workplace discrimination that they were confronted with on a daily basis. And I had the opportunity. I was working with the Johnny Cochran law firm at that time and trying to set that up. But then all of a sudden, when the time came to just, confidentially meet with someone who, he went through to have the clearance process, they all backed down. They all refused. And I can understand that. It's like, as much as they tell you you're a valued part of the intelligence community and the defense of our country, if you step out of line, I mean, the retaliation is supercharged being within the intelligence community. For me, so I can imagine that once I was convicted, that was a probably feather in the cap or a medal for the agency. It's like, see what happens. Look at Sterling. Look what happened to Sterling. He stepped out of line. He did this, he did that. Of course, no proof of any of it, but it doesn't matter. He's in prison. So think about that if you want to step forward and reveal our wrongdoings here at the agency or any place within the intelligence community. So it's all geared to be a message. I think the government may not have even cared if they got guilty conviction against me. I think they wanted to just show what we're going to do to you if you stand up to us. It's all about retaliation, and there's no protections, especially if you're in the intelligence community, you have no protections. I mean, none. I know, I'm absolutely certain Tom didn't, but when I took the oath, to defend the Constitution, defend my country when I joined the CIA, part of that oath wasn't to be a part of illegalities at the government or to hide illegalities at the government. That wasn't my oath, but that's what they will hammer you with. Because the first thing that happens when a whistleblowing situation, because the dialogue is controlled by the government, they determine what is a whistleblower or what. And when it comes to the intelligence community, there are no such thing as whistleblowers. There are only unauthorized leakers. That's because the government is in control of the dialogue. the first thing they do is character assassination. You know, and they're not talking about the issue being revealed, but they will focus on the wrong that the individual who revealed it has done. And then the focus stays there. And with the Espionage Act, the focus need go nowhere else other than the allegations and the accusations. And I think every time the Espionage Act is used, it is furthering the message, strengthening the message that we will get you if you do something against us, especially if you're in the intelligence community.
I'm not often asked the question, Kathleen, and you may, in my response, detect some emotion because I carry an extraordinarily heavy burden. There are people who I used to work with that no longer work at NSA because of their association with me. There was people that were put under extraordinary pressure to say anything negative about me, even if it wasn't true. I led a number of enterprise level teams. Again, I was quite senior. I say that because in targeting me, a whole lot of people found out what happened. Now, besides sort of the shock and awe of me being charged on the Espionage Act, anybody who had any association, directly or indirectly, scrambled to get as far away from me as possible. There's a thing called the 1,000-yard stare, which is sort of battle fatigue. It was a term used in World War II. There's famous pictures of just soldiers staring off into the distance. There was a time where I just about lost my marriage and I had no friends at all to speak of. You becomes a very lonely existence because you realize you're standing alone against the extraordinary might of the government, who literally wants to take away your life and put you in prison for the rest of your life, or effectively the rest of your life. So that burden is huge. There are a couple of people who have reached out in the past, but only after many, many years have passed. And most of those people had left the government anyways. I had a lot of people who knew what I had done, knew what I had done was right, but they said, the last thing I'm going to do is stand up or support it or turn into a whistleblower myself, because I have a family, I've got a retirement, I've got a mortgage, I got kids going to school, I can't afford to disrupt my life. I'm aware Ellsberg thought a lot more people. There was many people besides him and Russo that knew what was going on with the Pentagon Papers. I happened to be working in NSA and found out all this, right? Obviously, I was doing my own investigations. Did I have sources? Yeah, the government did everything it could to figure out who I had been in contact with. The last thing I was going to do is give up anybody NSA, but had any kind of contact with regarding any of the 3 areas in which I blew the whistle. I had to protect them as well. There wasn't anybody else left to protect them.
You know,
so
that lonely existence, I think,
yeah,
is magnified by, a lot of whistleblowers go through that in a lot of contexts, but it's quite magnified when you're facing criminal charges. And so I think, what will be interesting to hear from both of you is, where did you find support during your criminal prosecution? Where did you find, how did you get through it? That lonely existence to the place you are today, speaking so eloquently about something that must have been deeply traumatic.
For me,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead. Oh, well, I developed PTSD. I didn't know it at the time, but I ended up having classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome. I did. I had to deal with it. That was one of the first things I realized. It was not good at all. It just wasn't. I started losing weight. I stopped eating, basically. It was not good at all. I think I was in denial at first. I'm a pretty strong person, having faced a lot of things in my life. But this was the worst time in my life, period, because you're looking into the abyss, which was, Pandora's box, and all you see is this, this swirling clouds of darkness.
Yeah. Tom, I think you froze, but Jeffrey, you were going to jump in there.
For me, it'd be a very lonely experience. I mean, for me, I joined the agency undercover. When they retaliated against me for filing suit and bringing up and trying to blow the whistle on a faulty operation, my cover was immediately removed. I'd gone years. I mean, that was the community I knew, because that's a place where, other individuals who know the same lifestyle, you're under this umbrella of being a clandestine officer. When I was kicked out of that community,
Yeah.
I was certainly alone. But through the years, especially prior to and during the trial, my wife was steadfast, by my side. And that support, I had to rely on that support. Like when you can't help yourself, let others help you. And you certainly feel helpless with the government coming after you with the Espionage Act. Like Tom said, it's David versus Goliath sort of thing. So, but I found a community, especially when I was in prison, individuals who would write to me, in solidarity for what I was going through and the truth I was trying to tell. And there was a community I didn't even know about. Sometimes you have to go through the worst to realize the best in people or realize the support systems that you have. It was no longer there for me in the intelligence community. I was absolutely kicked out of that, but I found others along the way. And as Tom alluded to it before, how many groups that don't take an interest. I mean, being from the CIA kind of scares people a bit. When I was filing my discrimination suit, not one civil rights organization would even talk to me. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. I remember I went to one member and said, they're trying to put me in prison. They're coming after me. Well, I need help. The response I got from him was that I should just leave the country. And that was disheartening. There's this fear. You're from the intelligence community, the CIA. Any association with me would be bad for them as well. But I found others who broke through that, who saw me for the person that they know me to be, and maintained their support for me, or demonstrated their support for me. It can be very lonely at times, but again, at those darkest times, the support will reveal itself.
So, sorry, it looks like I left for a while. I'm back again. Well, guess who was the first person that Jesselyn Radak, Kathleen's colleague, insisted that I meet early on after I was indicted? It was Daniel Ellsberg, my hero. Remember, it's like someone who stood their ground and spoke out against wrongdoing in the government, the bright and shining light of Vietnam. And so I had this extraordinary conversation with Ellsberg early on, due to Jesselyn realizing there was only one other person in the world at that time who knew exactly what I was going through. So it was huge to have Ellsberg on your side of the case, not just as a whistleblower colleague, as I call him, he's my whistleblower father. That's how I looked at him: inspiration, standing up to the government and all the wrongdoing. He was also a senior executive, held sort of a similar position in terms of being at the highest levels of the government. And so he was the first person. And later on, there were journalists who were quite sympathetic. But it's important to note, I was actually declared indigent by the court. I had no money left. I already spent close to $100,000 on a private criminal defense attorney, and I literally had nothing left. And so that's where the public defenders came in, as well as a number of other attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, who basically, other than getting paid the court rate, basically supported me pro bono.
That's one thing for me. When I was released from prison, really, I mean, just the prospects of what's next. I mean, it was quite sad for me. depressing. And then Daniel Ellsberg reached out, and
Yeah.
that was such, I never considered myself, hey, Daniel Ellsberg, I felt was a great man, anything like that. And I'm out of prison. Here's Daniel Ellsberg giving me a call, and his support was tremendous. I never thought I would have any sort of interaction with the man, and that was just tremendous. And he maintained it. That's how genuine he was. Someone who was in the intelligence and did the right thing. And we would chat often. And so that's just it. It's whistleblowers, supporting whistleblowers. And that was something I didn't knew existed, was needed, or anything like that, but it made a huge difference for me.
Another set of people that actually came to my aid to protect me, and because I couldn't find any work. I was literally persona non grata, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, but I was even persona non grata directly or indirectly in the national security space. Government space didn't matter. There was a position I applied for in the DOJ, and when they found out that I was who I was, they said, "Nope, we're not hiring you." So I ended up at Apple, wage grade employee at Apple, worked there for 13 plus years before I had to retire early due to health reasons. They did everything they could. They said, yeah, if you're, end up being sentenced to prison, then that's different. But we're going to do everything we can to protect you while you're here. They even set up a special message for anybody, because there was all kinds of people calling in. Do you know that you have a criminal working for you? Do you know that you have someone charged on the Espionage Act? And then there was people that would come into the store to try to press me really, really hard. My hats off to Apple and the store leadership and even the head of HR. It came all the way out from California just to speak directly with me about, we're going to do everything we can to ensure that your workplace is safe for you.
That's great.
That meant I can't begin to tell you what that meant. Now, of course, I had you, Kathleen, and Jesslyn providing. One of the things that you provide is moral support, and because you well know what it means to what we have to live with, what we go through, what we deal with. It's hard to explain. I remember those hours and hours and hours of the depositions you took from me during the summer of 2010. But you two actually listened to where no one else was listening to me, because remember, even when the FBI raided me, I was still blowing the whistle with the FBI. I was literally naming names up to and including the President of the United States. I knew enough about the secret program to reveal the names behind it. So we're not here for that.
Wow. I think you paint such a difficult picture of being on the front lines. That's the title of our webinar, is Risks and Consequences on the Front Lines of the War on Truth Tellers. Where is that war today, and who do you view as on the front lines, or who was just on the front lines? Are there people that you see that you feel a kinship with, or a need to support? Where do you see yourself now in this space?
Well, for me, if I have a voice, if I can have a voice for change, I never would have chosen this for my life. I certainly lost a lot, twice with the agency, but maybe the point of this was because I certainly, sitting in prison, had a lot of time when I was like, what is this all about? What happened? Why am I here? Maybe this is the opportunity, just showing me that I can have a voice to right the wrong that continues to happen to whistleblowers, and especially in the intelligence community, having national security and the Espionage Act just thrown at them for daring to stand up. So I do what I can to advocate for whistleblowers, and because I've had that experience. And no, it hasn't been a good experience, but along the way, for me, it is, as long as I can like who I see in the mirror, then I'm okay. And I know I wouldn't have done anything differently, but as long as I'm good with me, and continuing to be good with me is supporting other whistleblowers. And I take whatever opportunities I can to share my experience and hopefully be a voice for change.
And we've seen, NSA whistleblower reality winner, drone whistleblower Daniel Hale, just in recent years receiving increased, sentences. And Tom, I know you've supported both of them, and you too, Jeffrey. And so, seeing that it's not a good development for the free press, but seeing you willing to provide that kind of support to other whistleblowers is encouraging. And now with Julian Assange being tried, being tried under the Espionage Act or prosecuted under the Espionage Act, watching you develop into the new Ellsbergs and having to take on that role, I think it's so significant to be able to do that. And Tom, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the support that you've given other whistleblowers, I think that would be good.
Well, you mentioned two of them already. I've had pretty frequent contact with both Reality, and during the ordeal, I was even part of a vigil when she was actually in a county jail for all those many months. I also directly supported Daniel Hale and just the egregious case against him, including contact with him when he was in a CMU of all places, Communications and Management Unit in Indiana, which is basically reserved for the worst of the worst. And even after he left, I actually saw him because I said I got to be there for him because I know that first year after, even in my case, I didn't go to prison, but I certainly came awfully close. That first year after, reintegrating yourself in terms of society is not easy at all. Just it isn't. And so, and there's a number of others, some that remain unnamed, who will come to me considering whether or not they want to become whistleblowers because of something they've seen in terms of a regulation violation, a law, or something, statute or something directly involving the Constitution.
What advice?
Of course,
what advice do you have for anybody who's, in the intelligence community now and maybe watching this on a Tor server? What advice would you give someone there who's thinking about blowing the whistle or seeing something that's illegal or wrong? What advice?
Well, before you blow the whistle, make sure you get a really good attorney or attorneys, because in my case, it took many. And so, and this is before you even think about blowing the whistle, because once you cross that line and you start making noises or you start dissenting or you begin to speak out, you're going to be targeted. I can tell you that right now. First, you'll be targeted as, there's a potential insider threat. In fact, as a result of my own case, I was actually thrown onto a list. In fact, there was a rogues gallery of those who would do us harm. And there I was, along with Snowden and some of the worst people that were actually truly committing espionage in this country, like Robert Hansen.
Or just mass murderers. I think the Navy
Or
Yard.
just murderers, the Navy Yard murderer right there. Right there I was. Yeah. That was really disturbing. I remember when that was brought to my attention by an independent journalist, and I just I was actually in France at the time at a conference where I was speaking, and I just sort of stopped. It's like, whoa, they really, really labeled me as an insider threat. And there was like a whole briefing in which I was described why I was an insider threat. That's been, that's why it's very possible, because they obviously, myself and Jeffrey, by going after us, the government going after us in the way they did, it sends a chilling message. It really does. You dare speak up or speak out, this is what can happen to you. And it doesn't have to be the full set of charges, but we might just threaten you with it.
What
and keep you in line.
what advice,
And
Jeffrey?
so it's really important. So it's really important for someone before they blow the whistle that they know exactly what they're getting into.
No, I agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, I think the die is set, you know, the die is cast when individuals even thinking about blowing the whistle or wanting to stand up against, you know, government wrongdoing. You know, my advice on that is yes, there's going to be a price to pay, but you know, stay the course. If that's not you, you know, stand up. You know, our government, and especially since 9/11, are so big on, hey, see something, say something, except when it involves the government doing wrongdoing. But you know, for any whistleblower out there, stay the course. You know, there's something within you that sees something wrong, and something within you is wondering what to do. You know, get advice from others, but you know, just and in getting that advice, you'll get a sense of, you know, what you might be facing. But you know, in the end, you know, there can be times when taking a huge risk can actually turn out okay. Yeah, I've been through terrible. I've been through hell. You know, our system is one of perpetual punishment. I went to prison. So, you know, maybe I'm not the best example to say, hey, whistleblowers, you know, come forward. But, you know, personally, through all of it, you know, I've made those connections with individuals. You know, I'm okay. I'm good with me and what I did. I know I wouldn't have changed anything. You know, hold on to the principles that are within you, those same principles that want you to serve your country in the intelligence community or wherever. You know, hold on to those same principles, and that will help you get through. Is my life perfect or back to the way it was? No. You know, it was a battle for me to get my law license back. And then to be admitted to federal court, I had to go through a gauntlet of 5 federal judges, you know, grilling me, you know, unnecessarily about my character. You know, my wife even said, had I been convicted of murder, I wouldn't have gone through the same process or the same gauntlet to get my law license back. And I think that says something. And I think that's what the government uses and expects and hopes, especially in our criminal justice system, which is, again, perpetual punishment. Um, it's the best tool the government can have to quash dissent. But for whistleblowers out there, you know, don't as much as you can, and I know it's difficult. You know, don't look at what's you're facing, what hell's going to befall you. Look at the good that can come out of what you're doing. No whistleblower has done so with an eye of gaining some fortune or anything like that. It's always with the eye of serving the country. And I think if whistleblowers stay with that, stay true to themselves in that aspect, I think we can change things and turn things around.
I think
Maybe in some, yeah.
I think you've spoken a little bit to it, Jeffrey, but Chris had a question, you know, which is an excellent way, I think, to end our time together. We have a few more minutes. Do you have hope for a more democratic country and foreign policy? And if so, what is that hope based on?
I think there is hope. There's always hope. I mean, that's how I grew up. You know, there's always hope, even when it seems like there shouldn't be any. There's always hope because there are individuals. I mean, the history of whistleblowers in this country have been so valuable. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg. I mean, look on the commercial side, the whistleblowers for dangerous products. I mean, I think there's always going to be whistleblowers, and they can be the voice of change. Things like the Espionage Act, I equate that to slavery. It's a way to keep us ignorant. Because, you know, as the slave owners knew, an educated slave won't be a slave for long. So if we can get rid of laws like the Espionage Act that are designed specifically to keep us all ignorant about what our government is doing, you know, if we can get rid of those laws, then we all will become educated more, and we will continue striving and hopefully get to those, you know, a more democratic country and a more reasonable humanitarian foreign policy, if you will. So yeah, I do have hope. Some may wonder why. Well, what else is there? What's the alternative?
Tom?
If I didn't have hope, I wouldn't even be here participating in this session. I wouldn't. I wouldn't, because when I look into Pandora's box, guess what has risen to the top is hope, because that's actually all that's left after all the Furies escape. That's what's left at the bottom, and it's risen up for me. So I embrace hope, but I am not unaware of the dynamics in the world today. There are increasingly anti-democratic forces who simply want power for power's sake. And part of it is simply to control the lives of others. It reminds me too much of dictatorships and autocrats. That's not the world I want to live in. I've actually experienced during the worst period of my life, when I was charged under the Espionage Act, what it means to be totally isolated from your fellow countrymen and the world at large, because that's what power likes to do. How dare you question power? We have the power. You can't take it away from us. And how dare you even question how we're even using it? Except that actually means the government has a greater responsibility to use the power in responsible ways, not irresponsible ways. And so they can charge people with the Espionage Act. They can attempt to put people in prison or actually have them end up in prison. That's not going to stop people like myself and Jeffrey from standing up and speaking out. It's the history of this country and all the democratic activist movements around the world.
Wow, that's incredible. And one more question. One more question for you. If you could pick just one, maybe two reforms that would prevent or alleviate the kind of retaliation you suffered, whether they be legislative or executive branch, what two reforms, either in the intelligence community or the law, would you think would be most effective at stopping the kind of retaliation that you two suffered?
I think protections for whistleblowers is sorely needed, especially those in the intelligence community. On the commercial side, False Claims Act, things like that, the government is eager to protect whistleblowers who are bringing forth instances of fraud against the government. When the government's the victim, the government's all for whistleblowers. But when the government is the the wrongdoer, there's no protection for whistleblowers there. So I think protections for whistleblowers are sorely needed. So we can continue to realize the value of whistleblowers. Other aspects that should be reformed, I think, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702, I believe. The mass surveillance must stop. Now, there's been some rumblings in Congress now. Maybe it's going to sunset, but I wonder, it may be a victory if FISA is not reauthorized, but to stop mass surveillance. But then you wonder, well, what's going to replace it? So I think keeping people interested and educated about things out there, moves by the government to erode our rights and erode our community as a nation. The more we know about those things, the less damage that they will do. And that knowledge comes from, a lot of times, from whistleblowers. So I think the law can change, should change, and hopefully we'll continue in that direction.
Tom?
Yeah, all the rights that whistleblowers supposedly have there's different acts, right? It also depends on where you work. But a right without a remedy is no right at all. It's just a paper tiger. And that's one of the biggest challenges, especially within the government sector, that I think we face going forward. You can't just there's got to be punishment. There really does. There has to be a price paid by those who retaliate against whistleblowers. Right now, it's only the whistleblower that pays the price, because the retaliator can get away with it and they know it. Second, we need better Americans across all forms of government. Democracy like America, which is really a republic, cannot exist. It just can't. Remember, all empires end up in the dustbins of history. It requires an informed citizenry, enough of an informed citizenry that care enough about civil society. And that's what I continue to encourage, is sort of the better people, as much as they can't stand politics, hate politics, don't get involved. Well, guess what? that have a huge influence over the course of our lives, especially those in government. So I'm just encouraging more people to step forward and take on the civic responsibility, not just voting. Yeah, we need people to turn out and vote, but that's just sort of the fundamental default. We need people that really care about our country stepping forward to represent who we are.
A republic, if you can keep it, right, Tom?
Well, it was the grand experiment. It was never, there were no guarantees.
Well, I think that is the perfect way to end our evening. Jeffrey, Tom, thank you so much for everything you've done for this country. You've certainly done your part to keep our republic. And thank you so much to the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy for having this significant, putting these people here out front to tell their stories. It is important for our democracy, and it's much appreciated. So, and thank you everyone for joining us and listening.